I want to thank everybody for logging in to our quarterly webinar. I'm Kim Anderson, and we have a great topic today. There are some new spinal cord injury primary care resources that are out available to the community, and also for us to share with our primary care physicians. And we all know that there's been many issues with that in varying health systems that we all live in or have lived in. So I want to go ahead and ask a polling question first before we get started. So Jess, if you can actually put that up on the screen. When, okay, so who do you normally go to for your primary care needs? If you could, everyone on the call could go ahead and choose one of these options. Hopefully one of these options is what you do. And then after you choose it, go ahead and click submit. And if you are a family member or a caregiver of someone with spinal cord injury, if you know the answer to this question that your loved one uses, please feel free to put in your answer that applies to them. I'm gonna actually answer two. Okay. Jess, how many answers do we have so far? And you're muted, so I can't hear what you're saying.
Thank you. We have 13 of 17, so 76% right now.
Okay, let's go ahead and give that a few more minutes. New people, we have new people coming on. If you see a polling question on your screen about who do you access for your primary care needs, please fill out your response there and click the submit button at the bottom of that question. And while people are answering that, I'm gonna let you know that we're gonna have 3 speakers. While they're speaking, if you have any questions or thoughts, go ahead and put those in the chat box because we'll be monitoring that. And then we will also have time for questions, question and answer session at the end. And this video is also being recorded so that we can archive it and more people can access it later on. Okay, Jess, let's go ahead and show the results of the poll question.
Can everyone see that?
All right, yeah. So it looks like 56% of people access a primary care doctor and 31% use both a primary care doctor and an SCI specialist, and 6% actually access an SCI specialist for their primary care needs. Thank you guys so much for doing that. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is gonna be Dr. Indira Lenig. She is a spinal cord injury physician specialist. And I'm not gonna go into what they're gonna talk about yet. They're gonna talk about that. But after Indira, we'll have Cody Unser start talking about her section of the primary care resources. And then we will end with Dr. Jamie Milligan, who is a primary care specialist or family practice physician in Canada. And we'll end up with his closing information. So Indira, if you want to go ahead and show your screen and share your screen, we can start.
Okay. Get it from the beginning. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
And let's see if we can move this floating control bar up out of the way. So today's presentation is about a new point of care SCI resource available to primary care providers. It was created by a collaborative effort of the American Spinal Injury Professional Society, as well as the American Spinal Injury Association, Asia and ASCIP, with the backbeat of our Canadian colleagues in Ontario. the goal of this particular resource is to address the needs of the primary care providers who are trying to serve the needs of SCI individuals that they're serving. We have, over the years, known that it's difficult to navigate the healthcare system even without a spinal cord injury, and it's even more challenging for those who do have a disability, whether it's spinal cord injury or another type of impairment. We also know that in order to have our needs addressed most effectively, if we've got a chronic diagnosis, there needs to be successful coordination of the three key players in optimizing your health. The specialist, the spinal cord injury specialist, the primary care provider that you see during intercurrent times between your annual or semi-annual conferences with your spinal cord injury provider, and then of course you as the consumer or the patient. In order for there to be successful coordination, each of the players needs to understand the pain points of the other. And the reason that that's important to point out is because over the, I've been in practice for 32 years, and we oftentimes can articulate or describe what the barriers to getting primary care access are. And the knowledge-based barriers, the administrative, attitudinal, and architectural barriers. But how do we move from describing what the problems are to describing what the solutions are? And what are the necessary steps to reverse engineer getting to the solution? And so this particular resource will allow us to be responsive to what primary care providers have shared with us as what they need when they take care of special populations, specialty care populations, and we'll just walk you through it. The reason that it's important for us to be disseminating the information on a platform such as this is because the acute care process and your inpatient rehabilitation is only a very, very short span of what I call the hero's journey. After an acute care rehabilitation process, we kind of toss you out into the wilderness of the real world, and you're having to navigate a variety of social determinants of health, getting into the healthcare system without professionals who necessarily speak spinal cord injury. And so it's important for you to know what the resources are and how best to share them over the course of the lifespan. When ASCIP and Asia put together this landing page and this point of care resource with the generous support of the Nielsen Foundation, what we wanted to emphasize isn't what we know to be true already in terms of things are difficult. And we don't want to just focus on what the solutions are. The missing piece is how do we get the information into the hands of the people that need it in order to tactically move the ball down the field in terms of you being able to get what you need. Sometimes people will wonder, my patients will wonder, well, we've been trying to get our needs met for decades, and what's different now? Well, what's different now is the landscape. I think on a national level, as you see in the middle part of the slide, the CDC put out this infographics, and they talk about disability impacts all of us. And this is part of the language that we need to be aware of when we talk about what we need as a spinal cord injury community interfacing with the primary care provider. We need to share that while we may have very specific needs, we are part of a larger community that has mobility impairments. And so the things that the primary care provider may be able to start considering if we share this resource with them, it's transferable across other mobility impairment conditions like stroke, MS, bilateral amputees, and other diagnoses that require things like accessible exam tables or accessible scales. Additionally, this slide also shows who else is part of this conversation about being more responsive and inclusive as you deliver care. On the right-hand side, you see information about the Commonwealth Fund in the northeast side of the country. They have made very nice gains over time. What was that, Kim? Oh, the Commonwealth community has made gains over time that are replicable and scalable in other places. To the left of that, there's the green rectangle that's talking about the Peterson Center for Healthcare Excellence. And what that organization has done is pointed out that there are pockets of success. There are pockets where they're getting it right in terms of improving access for special populations to get primary care and other resources. And what they say is, let's look at how we can fund the dissemination of information about these models that work. At the very, very bottom, you can see PM&R bold, and that is reflecting the commitment of the physiatric community to look at how do we elevate the awareness of what we as physiatrists do, and how do we help other professionals who are serving our patients do the type of good job that they want to do if they're given a roadmap. As it relates specifically to the primary care population, you know, when we think about primary care, we think about health maintenance and health protection, because if we do a really good job of taking good care of our health, if we have good health care, we don't need medical care. We don't necessarily need to be in somebody's emergency room or admitted to a hospital. And as a matter of fact, when we look at the most common causes of hospitalizations or readmissions for people with spinal cord injury, they are respiratory issues, skin issues, infections. And we oftentimes can say, we can look at the root cause, and we can say that it would appear that if this individual who ended up in the emergency room had access to disability sensitive primary care, this might have been a preventable ER visit or admission. And so that's the other reason why, when we look at who is going to be receptive to us sharing resources of use to them, we've got the landscape that says now is better than in the past. Additionally, when we ask primary care providers specifically, as Dr. Milligan and his teams have asked in Canada, primary care providers have said, yes, we definitely want to improve how we take care of our patients with spinal cord injury, but these are our pain points. This is what we really need. We need accessible equipment. We need real-time access to the specialty professionals, the OT, the PT, the case manager, the spinal cord injury doc, who can guide us in a patient-specific way when we're seeing an individual. And of course, they want a means of having point-of-care cheat sheets, and that's what our landing, our website is for. We know, however, that when we designed the landing page or the web-based resource for primary care providers, we know that mitigating knowledge-based barriers isn't the full equation. And so what we chose to do is design what's on the infographics in a way that, whether it's the primary care provider or the consumer/patient who is accessing the landing page, we've provided curated information on how to mitigate the organizational, the administrative, the attitudinal barriers that also influence a primary care provider's ability to do as good a job as they want to do, and the barriers of communication that a patient or consumer may have when interfacing with a primary care provider or physician. An example of the consumer oriented type of resource is something as simple as, how do you pre-screen when you're looking for a family medicine doctor? What kind of questions can you ask even before your first appointment? I put this slide in just to speak about the physical barriers in a very, very specific way. The reason that we, the primary care providers, as well as we as spinal cord injury docs, want to make sure that you have physical exam equity is because if you've got something like a skin sore on your ischium or a GYN issue or a lower abdominal issue, you know that we cannot be fully assessed in our wheelchairs. And therefore, we want to make sure that wherever we go for our health care can get us up on an examining table so that we have a equitable physical exam to somebody who doesn't have a physical disability. Similarly, if we're managing our weight or dealing with congestive heart failure or something else that requires accurate weights, we want to be able to make sure that people are able to get an accurate weight on us so that decisions can be made properly. One of the things that I wanted to point out before I hand it over to Cody and Dr. Milligan is, as you listen to Cody and Dr. Milligan, our number one ask is share the resources that we're sharing today, look at the resources even on the North American SCI Consortium landing page, and consistently share the knowledge. By sharing the knowledge and communicating effectively each and every day, that will move the ball down the field in terms of more people will help us carry the water up the hill because they can speak to the specific needs that the SCI community needs. I put this slide in just as a reminder. Oftentimes we will, as a community, a spinal cord injury community, we will have valuable resources for institutions, for trauma centers, for general rehab facilities, for primary care providers, and we leave these resources with them, you know, like Sam's First 90 Days or brochures about facing disability or pamphlets related to North American SCI Consortium. And then we wonder why the SCI patients in that institution don't receive them. The reason is that these organizations have their fiduciary responsibilities and their agendas, and they've got a momentum to get through what their priorities are. And while they may indeed want to be able to be as responsive as possible to the special needs of the diverse population that they serve, they may not have the physical time or the fiscal agility to be as responsive as we would want them to be. And therefore, ASCIP and Asia and the Canadian teams all invite consumers to share the knowledge among yourselves and with others across the aisle, whether it's social workers or other people with disabilities, so that everybody can be consistently requesting the same thing. And every revolution starts with a whisper. The more people who are able to articulate their ask systematically to a given organization or institution will get their collective attention more effectively. And with that, I will pass it on to Cody. Let's see.
Let me know when I can share my.
All right, let's see. Am I still sharing mine?
Yes.
Yes, you're still sharing your screen.
Let's figure out how I can unshare my floating controls.
Top.
Let's see. But
I think at the top, it says view options, or should it?
what I did was I removed the floating instructions or the floating controls.
Or down at the bottom, this says share screen, and I think you can turn it off.
Let's see if we can do that. What do you see now?
Because I think there should be a stop share button somewhere.
Right, and we made it disappear.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
Jessica, can you?
I think I can stop sharing.
Or Cody, what you can do is,
Well,
I can,
on my screen, it says that I can share my screen.
okay, let's see if you can share yours.
Should I just try?
Yeah.
Okay. This will stop others' screen sharing.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty. Let's go here.
Perfect. Great. Thank.
There you go.
All right. Thank you so much, Idra, for your portion. We are really excited to be a part of this consortium. We find it extremely important to really sort of bridge sort of the patient and consumer with your primary care provider. So just to give you guys a little bit of kind of a story about myself, kind of sharing why I'm part of this committee. I'm coming from more of a patient and consumer perspective, which is very important. So I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was very active as a child on four-wheelers, jet skis, grew up in an auto racing family, so we were always on the go. And my life changed completely on February 5th, 1999, when I was at a basketball practice and then had immediate shortness of breath, like I couldn't breathe. And so I sat down and then the symptoms got worse. I got a really bad excruciating headache and the school called 911. I was put in the locker rooms and my left leg went completely numb. My right leg was kind of tingling. So in a matter of 20 minutes, my life completely changed. So I became paralyzed. Kind of long story short, I went to the emergency room and my sort of symptoms were misdiagnosed. They sent me home. I couldn't walk, couldn't urinate. And my primary care at the time came to the house and she said, let's try to get you in the bathtub. Let me see if I can get some sort of signal going on. And that's when I completely freaked out because I couldn't feel the texture or the temperature of the water. So I went back to the emergency room and in like 2 weeks, they named my fate of transverse myelitis. So I know a lot of people with spinal cord injury, other paralyzing conditions, we all have our own story. We all have our own body, our own issues. So it's not one size fits all. But so after spending time in the hospital, I went to rehab, learning how to live my life like we all kind of do in a wheelchair. And I thought that having half of a body, having half of a functioning body meant having sort of half of a life. So depression set in, anger, I think we all kind of deal with a tragic or crisis event, something that challenges us very differently, but it's our own journey, right? So I wanted to do something about it. I, kind of thought that I became paralyzed for a reason. So I started the Cody Ensign First Step Foundation with the help of my mom and have been sort of, for the last 20 years, been sort of around the world of awareness of not only transverse myelitis, because it is a rare disorder, it's an autoimmune disorder, but also advocacy for people with disabilities. And we have a quality life program with scuba diving. So I kind of, I've been around a lot, not only in the SCI community, but also the disability community. And I'm very passionate about helping people sort of gain access, not only to healthcare, but also around any type of dream we may want to pursue and sort of break down these barriers that we are all sort of talking about. So to dive in a little further into sort of primary care and SCI and why, we started a committee to really address the problems that we face. The two main issues that I started seeing kind of just being paralyzed and navigating the healthcare world are the physical barriers and the attitudinal barriers. So I've had the opportunity to live in different cities across the US. So I realized that it wasn't just, an isolated incident in one city or one clinic. I started seeing this trend nationally. And then I started studying it when I was getting my master's in public health. And I realized I wasn't alone. I know that a lot of other people with mobility issues deal with these exact same sort of issues. And it shouldn't be this way. We shouldn't, we should be able to call any doctor and be seen and not have to, be faced with these barriers that we do. So the physical barriers that we sort of deal with are structural, and these are kind of, the heavy doors that, trying to get into the clinic. Sometimes they don't have accessible bathrooms. A lot of us with spinal cord injury, we deal with spasms and spasticity. So even just transferring onto a toilet is dangerous because if there's not a bar that we can grab onto, we can fall. So there's, that big issue. And of course, the exam table, kind of what Idra was talking about with, we want to give our providers the chance to examine us have, the access to our bodies. And being in a chair, you don't get, the full access. So being able to transfer safely onto an exam table is so crucial. And right now, you see in primary care offices, OBGYN offices, that the exam table is often way too high, way too narrow. It doesn't have any sort of bars for us to grab onto. So we can spasm easily right off. And so, that's kind of a barrier right there when you get into the exam room that you're sort of faced with. And a lot of the times I've had to bring my mom or a friend to a doctor's appointment, and it shouldn't have to be that way. Like, we are independent people. We want to take control of our own bodies, our own health. And how can we, fix this problem? Because it is a big one. If you're not able to safely get onto an exam table, you feel like that you shouldn't be there. You feel kind of as not only a consumer patient, but as a human being, like I'm not being cared for properly because this barrier exists. So definitely the exam room table is kind of a big problem. And then of course the attitudinal barriers. So these are sort of behaviors or perceptions that prevent people from communicating. So it's really about the lack of understanding, sensitivity, and knowledge of providers, which can lead to incorrect assumptions and discriminatory statements. So just to give you kind of an example, a personal experience that I went through, I was living in DC at the time, went through a really bad breakup, kind of not really taking care of myself, was drinking too much, having way too many sex partners. But I woke up one day and was like, I deserve better. And I was like, I need to finally take care of myself. And so I contacted an OBGYN and a primary care physician just to get some sort of healthcare, process going. And after sort of meeting, I knew there was going to be physical barriers. I knew, living in DC, it's hard to get around the city, but also the healthcare world isn't so inviting. So finally, when I was able to get into an exam room, I knew I was going to have to bring a friend to help me transfer onto the table. The physician came in, and I kind of, from day one, I think a lot of us with spinal cord injuries or other paralyzing conditions, we are the ones that know our own bodies. No one else does. And so it is so important for us to give, accurate information, our medical history. So I, was sitting across from the provider and, said, I have transverse myelitis. I'm paralyzed from the chest down. I deal with bladder and bowel dysfunction. I have spasms, so when you examine me, my legs will spasm on you. And so went through the entire sort of medical history. And then during the exam, my legs actually started spasming. And, he reached around and said, "Oh, don't be nervous." And I was kind of like, I'm not nervous. I am paralyzed and I do have spasms. So, I just didn't feel like he heard me, or, did I give him all the information, So I think a lot of us with spinal cord injury, we're faced with that idea that when you go into a healthcare office, you sort of assume that they know, the body, but they didn't, get, sort of the spinal cord injury or paralysis stuff in medical school. So then it's on us to provide the right sort of education resource about our bodies and what goes on. So that's kind of why we sort of created this committee, and this resource is to be able to give providers the sort of correct information, everything that we go through on secondary conditions, kind of like bowel and bladder dysfunction, like I talked about, but also like autonomic dysreflexia, anything that we are trying to address, we know that it's really important. So this resource has become sort of a big, it's kind of like our Bible, basically, to give to providers. And I've given it to not only the primary care physician, but my OBGYN, anybody that really is around you and cares about you, even like your nutritionist or your your trainer, just anybody that cares about you should know what all encompasses you. So communication between physician and somebody with a spinal cord injury is extremely important. And this resource is able to provide that tool for all of us. And then kind of what I wanted to talk about and tell you is what we see, and kind of Idris sort of talked about this, is these barriers do have consequences. So if you feel like you can't get into if you're facing too many physical barriers going to a provider, or they're not hearing you, or you feel rejected, or they're not listening, we just will stop caring for our bodies. We'll just stay at home. All right, well, maybe my pressure sore isn't that bad. And you wait until something gets really bad and end up in the emergency room, which then skyrockets our health insurance. So it's pretty much like a ripple effect. And we're trying so hard to really provide a resource that actually bridges, provider and a patient with a spinal cord injury. So kind of, again, like, why are we bridging primary care with SCI? So a lot of us, we have, our specialty care with our spinal cord injury specialists, whether it's a neurologist, physiatrist, we do see our sort of specialists. I kind of go every 2 years, I go see my sort of specialists that deal with sort of, how bad is my osteoporosis right now? Different things that, they can address with spinal cord injury specific issues. But then in between times, we want to be able to prevent other issues, other healthcare issues. And so that's why our primary care physician is so important, our OBGYN, our dentist, that kind of thing. So it's definitely, if you think about it, the primary care physician considers the whole body. And that's why, it's important for us to continue to talk to them. I kind of make, it's really much about a comprehensive healthcare team. So if you have a spinal cord injury, you deal with secondary conditions, and maybe your specialists deal with that as well and help you navigate, all right, what's the best bladder medication for you? How often are you cathing? How many UTIs do you have? But then if you're not able to sort of travel to your specialist, if it's at a spinal cord injury center, you do want to have a doctor in your local area. And so, and it's really crucial for that doctor to know what is a spinal cord injury, but also the secondary conditions and the other issues that you really go through on a daily basis. So that's, again, kind of the solution that we have sort of created, and that we want to help other people, consumers, patients, providers, to disseminate, is this centralized resource. So when we started this committee, it's all about sort of, it encompasses primary care clinicians, SCI specialists, consumers with SCI, researchers, and other stakeholders. And we want to create a more promising dialogue among these groups. So the goal is really about advancing primary care and delivery and services for people with SCI. It's so crucial because we deal with a lot of daily issues that we can't always access our spinal cord injury specialists. So having a primary care physician is really important. So what I would like to do now is, before I turn it over to Jamie, I'm going to just kind of go through the website with you guys and sort of tell you, what's really cool about it. Let me exit out of there. And, the goal really is about disseminating information. Let me just pop it up. Can you guys all see this? Move that. All right, so, and basically
We're not seeing the website.
You're not seeing it.
The website. You may have to share the website screen.
How do I do that?
So
You're not seeing it on my end?
It might be easiest to just stop share and then share the websites again.
Right.
Separately.
Stop share.
Then you can share the website.
So I can't share my screen then.
Oh, it says you should be able to share your screen. 1 second.
Oh wait, maybe I have an idea. Hopefully this will work.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay. So this website is awesome, and what's really cool about it is that it's an ongoing process. Like, we are always updating. It's evidence-based research. So kind of the best thing to do, and we're actually trying to create a PDF file so that patients, consumers can print it out and actually take it to their primary care physician. We're trying to figure out a best way to give them this resource. But the website is awesome, and it's, we worked really hard on it. What's really cool about it that I like, so there's a checklist for primary care physicians. So if you go to this link, it takes you to all the sort of secondary conditions that they should know about. So neurogenic bladder, neurogenic bowel, respiratory complications. So there's different resources on here that really kind of help the provider know what we deal with. And then if we go back, see, there's what I also like is these actionable nuggets. So it really takes, there's a lot of information out there. And so what are the most important things that primary care physicians can actually act on? So again, when you scroll down, so here are the actual nuggets, and you want to say view all. And here we go. So again, these are sort of our secondary conditions. So let me go back to down here to neurogenic bladder and read more. So in yellow, it kind of gives the provider an actual nugget to work with. So bladder function should be reviewed annually by a family physician and periodically by a urologist. And then it gives, different, information about the neurogenic bladder. So the actual nuggets are really convenient for busy providers, which is really important. And then, and I'm sure, I really encourage everybody to just go to the website, really go through it. There's a lot of information on here, different articles and takeaways, removing barriers to healthcare. There's also sort of tax incentive information for clinics who do need accessible equipment. And then let's see, there's also patient education resources, and we're also trying to, again, like I said, make this accessible for us as consumers and patients to be able to say, all right, I have my next appointment coming up. What should my primary care physician notice and pay attention to about me? It's really intimidating to go into, sort of a healthcare setting and talk to a provider when you think that they should have all this knowledge, and they, there's a lot of information that they have to know as doctors. So it is up to us to sort of power ourselves to, the more you share to your doctor, the more you're going to get back. So this is a perfect resource to make that happen. So I really just encourage everybody to go to the website, and we have the link on every sort of slide of our presentation, but it's been really cool to be a part of this process to sort of bridge this gap, because it is a big gap that we need to sort of deal with. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jamie. Go back down here. Oh, wait, no, up here. Stop share. All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to talk about really other cool things about this.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks, Indira. And thanks for the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium for, hosting this. This is so important. And, I'm always glad to talk about primary care, and I hope this ends up being informative. So sorry, my slides are a little smaller and my computer right now is being a little unstable with the full thing. So I'm going to go through it this way. So I'm a family doctor in Ontario, Canada. So my perspective is going to come from primary care. I have a regular family practice, as well as I help to manage many individuals with physical disabilities and spinal cord injuries. Cody expertly laid out the barriers that, are well known. I mean, the physical barriers are obvious. I want to emphasize again a little bit more like the attitudinal, the knowledge, and the system barriers, because they're not as obvious, but they're probably in some ways a lot more pronounced in terms of disparity towards healthcare. They often can be sort of the silent things. And these things are often intertwined with each other, right? So that you often have people who lack knowledge, often have attitudinal issues as a result of lack of knowledge. System issues, lack of time with physicians affects attitudes. Those things become very complicated. But if you funnel those down a little bit, what it comes down to probably is like communication and knowledge dissemination amongst those really helps to break down those barriers. So this is, again, coming back to the whole reason why this project is so important. We really want to improve communication at all levels. And we want to get and disseminate this, especially down to the community level, which is so challenging to do. But as Dr. Lanning pointed out, this is critical. I mean, everybody spends a vast majority of their lifetime within that community spectrum. So it's really important. But this is the time to do it. The landscape, as Dr. Lanning said, is changing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that from a primary care perspective. But, it is, oh, sorry, I'm going to go back a bit. Actually, I meant to be up here. There you go. Sorry about that. I just talk about these things anyway. I don't know if the slides make any sense compared to what I talk about. But, in a complex condition like SCI, it's easy for confusion to develop. There's no excuse, but it's easy for confusion and communication to break down. And a part of that is that there's so many people that can be involved in care, right? I mean, you can, who should be involved in your care? Who should you see what for? We've already talked about that a bit. Who's telling you one thing? Who's telling you another? I had a patient come in and tell me, a patient with spinal cord, an individual with spinal cord injury, come in and tell me a few weeks ago, actually, really kind of interesting. They said to me, I have all these people that I see as part of my care. I have this physiatrist, I have this neurologist, I have this respirologist, I have this urologist, I have this cardiologist. They said, I have all these doctors with "is" on the end of it. And I don't know, I can't keep track of what any of them do. So, we were sitting there and we were chatting, and we finally said, well, you know what? You only have one doctor without the "ist" on it, and that's either the family physician or the nurse practitioner or the general practitioner or whoever it is. And that is an important person for you in terms of kind of coordinating a lot of your activities. This is not to downplay the importance of the specialists. They are incredibly important. But as Cody and Indira sort of said before, it's not practical always. We have to put, it's really nice that we saw in the poll that a lot of people kind of identified the family physician as their primary care provider, or as their person they would go to, because that is really the way the system is sort of set up, but maybe not optimized. So that's really important. It's good to see that that's kind of happening, but it needs to happen a bit more. Certainly globally, healthcare is transforming. It's widely recognized that, efficient, effective healthcare really has to be down in the community level. So it has to be patient-centered, it has to be community-focused. We really need to kind of get away from the hospitals and the ER departments unless we really need to be there. Otherwise, we're just kind of sort of, jamming up the system. But then primary care has to be responsible. So oftentimes we see primary care as being described as sort of the medical home. Okay, this is sort of your place for most things, you know, but in that vein, it has to be accessible, it has to be available, it has to be knowledgeable, and in the end, it has to be helpful. Okay, but if primary care is going to be the place for most things, it's not necessarily going to be specialized in many things. That's what we know. However, it doesn't mean that it can't be. And it should be the place to go for many individuals with SCI who experience conditions related to their spinal cord injury as well, like some of the secondary conditions. Primary care should still be a place for that. It definitely, but we need to make it better through some help and coaching. And again, this is where our resource will help with that. So many studies have demonstrated that, you know, individuals with spinal cord injury educate their primary care providers, and Cody talked about that as well. You know, this isn't really necessarily a fair thing, but it's something that has actually happened quite historically. But it's also been demonstrated that it's actually quite an effective thing as well. So it's sort of the army of individuals that really are the most powerful in the whole scheme of sort of getting that knowledge out there. And when I show this slide and talk about spreading the word, I mean, it's the responsibility of everybody. And Cody mentioned that as well. She brought up a really good point about, you know, we don't see primary care as just your family physician, nurse practitioner, that sort of thing. It is your dentist. It is your, you know, your attendant person. It is your physiotherapist, your occupational therapist, anybody else who sort of, you know, touches your life in the community is definitely somebody who can help and somebody we need to reach out to. The only thing about, you know, it's also been shown that people, and Cody mentioned this as well, that individuals with SCI don't always necessarily feel super comfortable about being the person who has to educate their doctor about their needs. And not only that, like, you know, feel like they're doing it in the right way or, you know, educating them enough. So this is coming back to, you know, everybody has to play a role in that. But I also want to talk maybe a little bit about how we do that a bit. So, and how maybe it's a bit more effective in primary care to do some of that education, especially by maybe individuals with lived experience. So there are studies out there that show that 2/3 of physicians actually do approve of patients researching their own condition and bringing in information. And that's actually growing and growing and growing. You know, but what you do find, and this is my own experience with things as well, that a lot of times patients are really hesitant to sort of share their research. You know, they'll often kind of look at you very sheepishly and say, you know, I know I shouldn't have Googled this, but, you know, my symptoms, but, you know, I'm worried I have a brain tumor, right? And they came in with a rash or something. And a lot of that, the hesitancy comes from sort of that differential power that can exist for sure, and the time constraints and just all those other barriers are there. But it is okay. At the end of the day, as I said, it is okay to research things, and why wouldn't you? I mean, you know, it's out there. It's easy to sort of find things. Is the information always right? Not necessarily, but it is important that people look into their own symptoms. I mean, I do it when I go in and take my car in. I'm probably never right, but it's still okay to do that. So I actually do encourage that, and I don't think people should feel badly about it. And as I said, we sort of anticipate it. It's also changed the way I think we deliver, many doctors deliver care. You know, patients will come in with more knowledge and ideas than they ever have before. And it's really important that we actually address that. So a lot of times where we maybe have gone through a history with a patient before, and then we do a bit of a physical exam, and then we sort of tell them what's going on, you know, the standard kind of traditional medicine thing. It's changed so that now a lot of people will do a history, you know, okay, what's kind of going on with the patient? And maybe do the physical, maybe not. But then turn and ask the patient, what do you think it is? You've probably done a little bit of reading about this. What do you think is kind of going on? And that's actually really important, because if you never do that, you never really get inside what a person's thinking and the questions they may have. And if you just tell them what you think it is and never address what they think it might be or might not be, they leave feeling dissatisfied. So I don't think there's, long and short is, I don't think there's any problems with sharing information. It's kind of maybe the way in which we do it. The other thing that's good about information sharing, and if we think about it when we do share with physicians and other clinicians, is that things that make your health better, because physicians, that's what they're in the business for, is to make your health better. That's what everybody got into it for, very important. And makes their job easier, that's actually super important as well, is really often accepted, right? So, I mean, it's a win-win there, especially if, you know, the physician doesn't have to go looking around for all kinds of things, rooting through it, it's delivered to them and it's concise, it makes sense. So how can you share information in a way that can be a bit more valuable? And these are just some tips perhaps. So one is, first of all, make sure that evidence that's shared or information that's shared is evidence-based or evidence-informed and reliable. Okay, that's very important. You don't want blog type of things. You don't want sort of more fluffy types of things. It does have to be evidence-informed. Share important points about things. So don't bring in a whole binder full of things, but really bring in the things that really make sense and do it maybe periodically. And then, as I mentioned, emphasize how it can help both of you in terms of your health and also just making their job easier and the collaboration that you have together as a team easier. And, you know, one thing I've sort of seen around a little bit when I've kind of looked at this topic is sometimes when you feel uncomfortable about sharing, there's been some talk about asking a permission to share, which I thought was really kind of interesting because there is sort of this perceived power differential maybe when you're in their office and this kind of thing. And it's sometimes like, you know, let's say you have some information, it's asking, you know, would I be able to, would you mind if I shared this information with you about my condition and how we might be able to work together as a team better on that? You know, it's really hard for a person, even if your relationship is very kind of, you know, tight boundaries with a physician or something, it's really hard to kind of turn down something like that when it's presented in a manner that really asks you to ask permission to be a collaborator in your healthcare. So just some tips that I thought were really kind of interesting. So I just want to go to the website really quickly, and I want to show with a couple of things that I think are going to be important if you had to share anything. And I think ideally you want to sort of look through it yourself and see what it does to you. But Cody mentioned, like, one thing we're going to do is try to put a button on this website that says, for patients, click this button to take this brochure to your family doctor. Right? It would be a one-pager, super simple, outline what the resource is so that they can use it, maybe scan it into the chart. And I have to emphasize, and, you know, maybe have your name on it and what your level of injury is or something, so it's a bit more personalized, but really, really simple, because family doctors are really simple. And so we need to keep it that way. But in the meantime, what you could do is you could just print off this first page with the URL on it and take it in until we have that, you know, device, because again, it's going to show, you know, it's going to get most of it, and you can really kind of highlight on some of this stuff. And then you want to really highlight the fact that Cody and Indira said is that this is an endorsed, evidence-informed resource that was put together by physiatrists, primary care providers, and persons with lived experience. And really hit on the fact that it really is endorsed by the specialists within the field. Okay, that's very important. Share with other specialists as well. I don't want to stop short on primary care here. Share with neurologists, share with urologists, share with cardiologists. Remember, a lot of them aren't dealing specifically with SCI, okay? And then look through here and gradually kind of pick out resources that fit with you. There's lots of things on autonomic dysreflexia. You may or may not have autonomic dysreflexia, but over time, maybe pick out some of those resources that you can also start to share. Another one that if you're going to take right away that I kind of like is, a lot of times prevention sort of gets lost in spinal cord injury care. So if you go to this has a really nice sort of little bit of an outline that you and your family doctor, if it's going to come up. A one pager on sort of like hey, you know what? These are kind of the things you could do on an annual basis or so to look at your overall health. Because in primary care, prevention is really, really big. But they're not always going to know how to do that within spinal cord injury. This is something you can do together as a team. All right, so I'm just going to go back to our presentation there for a second. So yeah, have a look through the website. It's, you know, it is really helpful that way. And then share it as much as you can. And basically these last two slides really just talk about here how healthcare has to change, especially for the more complex chronic conditions. As Cody said before, one size doesn't fit all. And as Indira said, this is the time, like healthcare is rapidly changing globally right now. So this is the time for this type of a thing. You know, I always say, well, me and some other people always say healthcare works really well for the people who are well, okay, or the people who are seriously unwell, you know, immediately go to emerge, you know, you have a fracture, something like that. Where it breaks down and falls down is for the people who have complex conditions. And those are really the people that need healthcare probably almost more than anybody. Okay, so it's nice to see that changes are being made. And at the end of the day, Dr. McCall, who's a researcher in Kingston, Ontario, has sort of done a lot of work in this area and said, in terms of physical disabilities, you know, we can't just ask more of family doctors alone. We can't ask them to do more. They're already doing kind of a lot of things. The key is providing the tools and supports to actually do that. So this is the tool. We need to get the army out on the ground, distributing this tool around, and that's how we'll make a difference and really, really make a change. So I think that's it for me.
Great. Thank you guys so much for your presentations. If everyone looks in the chat message box, I posted the link to the Asia Primary Care website there. And I do really encourage you guys to go and explore around it. I actually sent the link to my own primary care physician. She had mentioned that she sees 1 or 2 other people with spinal cord injuries. And she actually thought the resource was really great for her to keep for whenever questions do come up and she can go back and research those different areas. I know we're running a little bit short on time, and there are, on that website, there are 19 different topics related to primary care. So there's topics on obviously bladder and bowel, on pain management, wheelchair prescriptions, all kinds of things. And we wanted to know if people do have an interest in having more webinars on those different topics. So we have a question here. Jessica, can you go ahead and put that up? Just yes or no answer. Are people interested in additional webinars on these different primary care topics? And if there is interest, we have a follow-up opportunity for individuals. So you should see a poll on your screen here. Are you interested in a webinar series about specific primary care topics related to spinal cord injury? Either yes or no, and then click the submit button. Each one of those articles that are on the primary care website was written by an SCI specialist, a primary care physician, and a person with spinal cord injury. So that's a really unique thing. I don't know that it's ever happened anywhere else. 19 different evidence-based articles also written by people with spinal cord injury to have their perspective and experiences included in there. So those can be really powerful and helpful for your own primary care physician. Jessica, do we have results from the poll?
We do. We have 66%. So I don't know if you want to keep it open a bit longer or.
66%. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty strong yes interest.
Oh, sorry, 60. Just clarify, 66% of the people on the Zoom right now. So have voted. So.
Okay.
So, but if I end the poll, then the results will come up.
Okay. Yes. Go ahead and yes.
There we go.
The answer is, well, 95%.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you post a link in the chat now, Jessica. We've created a link in case there was interest that will take you out to a SurveyMonkey question that has all 19 topics in there. And we, it'd be very difficult to try to do a webinar on 19 different topics. If we did that once a month, it would take us over a year to do all of those webinars. But if people can tell us, rank those different topics, what is most important to you to have actually more detailed information on, then we can go back and work with the others in the consortium and potentially with Asia and ASCIP to try to put on some more specific webinars that the community is interested in. And I know that we are just over time, but if people have questions that they would like to ask of the speakers now, go ahead and unmute yourself. You can do that on your participant, in multiple locations, and actually go ahead and speak up.
I have one that's not quite on the topic of this. One of the things that I know is a big problem for us is getting ourselves weighed, especially at home, because wheelchair scales are abortions. They're big, they're huge, they're expensive. A friend of mine and I had come up with an adapter that fits over a standard issue $20 bathroom scale that would let anybody with a manual chair not necessarily get their exact weight, but at least get a weight number that they can track. And I was looking at trying to market it, but just to cover my butt, I checked, and the FDA seems to say that's a medical device. And how do I protect myself from having to deal with the FDA? They're the worst evil people. And I absolutely, it's like it almost killed the thing. And as far as I'm concerned, if I have to go through all sorts of FDA hoops and run the price up to the point where nobody can afford to use it. So how do I escape from the clutches of the FDA?
This is Bill. Can I jump in on that, Bill, from United Spinal? Interesting that you mentioned that. So did I understand that you were hoping to commercialize it in order to make a practical, home-based, affordable scale available to manual wheelchair users?
Right.
I made one. I DIY'd one because I printed out the most affordable and highly rated one that I could find on the internet. Took it to my PCP. It was about $650. In the way of medical devices, not really outrageous, but it was well rated. It could be used for anyone, but it could be used by wheelchair users and give an effective means of weighing. And I would argue that being able to weigh at the PCP's office is a basic, healthcare right and a basic healthcare need. Docs jump in and correct me if I misspeak. So I took that down there, and his office is part of a conglomerate owned by the corporate office. They denied it because they're cheap, and they don't really give a care. If about a wheelchair user here and there, if it costs them a couple bucks. So I DIY'd one, made it up in my own home workshop in the garage for $28 worth of materials from Lowe's. And it works great, and it works exactly as you described it. It won't necessarily, depending on how careful you construct it and how carefully you use it every day, it won't necessarily guarantee you an exact weight each and every day, but it will absolutely, in my experience, I think within a pound or two, give you a very accurate range. And it definitely shows a trend. If you're really dieting and exercising and you're being serious about it, expect to be losing some weight. You can tell for sure.
Yeah. Well, basically what mine is basically it's like an H-shaped frame that fits over a scale with basically 2 pieces of 1/4-inch pipe. And if you can, and basically you pop your back wheels up onto it. And if you can pop and hold a wheelie, you get your weight of you and your chair. And your chair isn't going to gain weight, so you can assume any changes is you as long as you're consistent about what you're wearing and so forth. And if you can't pop a wheel, you at least get the weight of what you've got on the back wheels of your chair, which is most of your weight. And again, it's a number that you can track. And as long as you're consistent in how you weigh yourself, you're going to have something that you can track. And really, outside of the doctor's office, you don't care what you weigh when you step on the scale. You care, am I up or down from last time? I mean, you know, if you think about it, you don't say, oh, I weighed 173 pounds today. No, you say, gee, I weighed 2 pounds less than I did yesterday.
Oh yeah, but it's a motivator. It's a motivator if you're trying to make an effort. And I'm a hand cyclist, so I, am trying to pay attention to that right now. And if you're making a concerted effort to reduce your intake and improve your, increase your exercise, then it does make a difference. It's the difference between being successful or giving up, I would think.
Indira, did you want to make a comment there?
Yes, what's good about the two of you bringing up this issue is it's an example of the perpetuated workarounds, unmet needs. And one of the things that the PCP landing page is inviting people to do, if you share it within the landing page, it has information on making sure that more primary care clinics and more community-based settings have wheelchair accessible or universal access scales, whether it's at the fitness center, which we can't go to because of COVID, or the gym, or the emergency room, or the PT area, making sure that it is easy for people with mobility impairments to weigh themselves, whether it's because they're on a weight reduction program or because they've got something like congestive heart failure. And that's why we want to go ahead and start pushing the information that's on the landing page out into the hands of both providers and patients, because we shouldn't, as citizens of a given community, to have to do workarounds. There has to be equity. All of us should be able to weigh ourselves in a variety of settings rather than trying to do all the workarounds, because in the meantime, it's the meantime. And as you navigate through the website, you'll see the information that we have specifically for providers on how to acquire scales that are universally accessible and get the tax deductions and whatnot for acquiring them.
Yeah, I think surviving with spinal cord injury, you learn to be the expert workaround on everything in life. But there's certainly knowledge that different facilities don't have. And probably, I would guess, many facilities don't know that there's actually tax breaks for getting accessibility.
Right, what we tried to do with this particular landing page, the curated materials are very practical so that if you read them, you can take an action. Mm-hmm. It answers a question that gives you a tool so that you can advance what you're trying to do as a primary care provider or as a person with a disability needing to get an unmet need met. It's not just a pool of just, theoretical stuff. We've tried to handpick things so that you can actually do an action.
Do we have any other questions that people have? You should notice that Jessica did put the link to their SurveyMonkey question in the chat.
I had a couple things to say. One of the questions was, thank you all for not only hosting this, but sharing your experience. But on that page, is there like a link for finding a specialist in particular for a given area?
Well, kind of, sort of. If you share it with your primary care provider, on the bottom, I think I put it like under the patient education area or somewhere on the right-hand side, it's got a list of all the model systems of care, as well as, I think, the VA 128 centers. And we're inviting the discharge planners to reach out to those specialty centers to ask, who are your people using in terms of primary care in this zip code or this region? The other thing that we invite people to do is primary care providers who are also available to physiatrists taking care of general disabilities. I think I put it down on the right-hand side. So in terms of it identifying one particular person, we're not putting specific names on the landing page, but we're giving you a roadmap to who can answer that question in your region.
All right, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Ask anything.
I mean, like, you know, if I can just drag you back to my scale, I'm like, why is this welded metal adapter that has absolutely no moving parts, no electronics, or anything else, something that needs to be FDA approved any more than the reacher stick that I pick up at Home Depot for $1.99 with a magnet on the end that I use to reach stuff off of high shelves, or any of the other tools that we use every day to work around stuff. It's like, those aren't medical devices. Why is an adapter to use a scale a medical device?
I definitely hear your frustration. The only time I get my weight weighed is when I go to see my physiatrist in Baltimore. So every time I go to my OBGYN for my annual exam, there's no way for them to weigh me. So I did do some research. There is a exam table out there that actually has a scale built into it called the upscale. But the problem is like, how do we get this, you know, kind of what you're saying, something that is so crucially important into all the clinics? Because it's not only for people with SCI, but like elderly people who have a hard time getting on either the exam table or, you know, a scale. Like, this is just one, I don't know, it's frustrating.
And that's one of the things,
guess my weight.
Right, and that's one of the things that we point out when we were talking about what the CDC is pointing out in terms of disability affects all of us and what percentage of Americans have a mobility impairment. Every person who has a mobility impairment potentially needs a universal access scale. So there is a public demand, or there's a percentage of the population that could use this type of more easily accessible device. And the more that primary care providers or other interprofessional communities understand that it's not just our ask for our specific condition, it's for the patients that they serve that have strokes and other mobility impairments. And we must not be afraid to request this type of physical exam equity. And the website gives you, again, the information on how to do that with an elegantly disruptive approach.
And then back to your question of previously of, you know, dealing with the FDA and why should a simple device be considered a medical device? And obviously we all know once you put the term medical on something, the price jacks up 20, 30, 40, 50, 100%. But I have a colleague that I work with that used to be at the FDA. And if you don't mind, I'll pose this question to her to try to get some input on the simplicity, you know, the device. Are there other routes that you might be able to go through? And
I think there are. I think there are. When we talked about it at the NIH National Advisory Board for Medical Rehab Research, there was a bump out in terms of, you know, cross-sector collaboration with community-based entrepreneurs, and it walked through some of these glitches about the workaround of labeling something as a medical device versus something else, and the language is very, very specific, and there's opportunity to get it done if you know the right terminology.
And I've got your email, so I'll email you back the information that I find out.
Right. Feel free to share mine too, if that helps.
Okay, great. Do we have any last questions before we log off here? I think
If,
this
if
was,
people do have questions and they don't want to ask on this forum, how do you want to facilitate that, Kim?
we can, if you three are not opposed to sharing your email address, when we send out, we've got everybody that was registered, so we've got everybody's email, and we'll be sending the link of the archived video. If you don't mind, we can include your email addresses and then people can communicate with you directly.
Yes, and also what I did on the last slide was I put Patty Duncan's email address on the last slide, and she can be the triage person for any type of question that you have. If you have specific questions related to the landing page, or if you want to get in contact with one of the three of us, or if you're looking for speakers from the entire pool of speakers on our committee, Patty Duncan can help answer those types of questions.
Perfect. Excellent. And Dr. Lenig did just, oh, I've got that was to me. Okay. I will share all three email addresses with everyone that was attending.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys.
I do have another question. Out of curiosity, is there any thought being given to like collecting data currently? I know that with HIPAA laws, there's a lot of restrictions for when you go from one office to another. You know, a lot of times that information doesn't transfer over. But one of the big disruptive technologies right now is like the convergence of several different technologies, actually. I'm curious.
Right, and so the terminology that we use as physicians and within the triad of generalists speaking with other specialists is what's the interoperability of the different electronic medical records that we all use. Fortunately, there are platforms by entrepreneurs out in the community that are trying to allow us to look into your record from one facility to another. And then also, for example, if you're a beneficiary for Medicaid or Medicare, being able to look into the benefits silo of your information so that the action plans related to you are better informed, because me as a spinal cord injury doctor, I'm seeing what the primary care provider is doing. I can see on one sheet what your benefits are. I can see what the discharge planner has in his or her record as well. And so that the language of that is, you know, what kind of interoperable platforms are being created. And you can Google that and you can see who's trying to help us with that wicked problem.
Yeah, it's a good point though, Jared. It's a real stumbling block in what's going on in some aspects of care and research. Yeah, Canada is the same thing. We have a lot of different primary care electronic medical records and then different hospital stuff, and they don't talk to each other very well, but that's being worked on. It's pretty archaic, you know, when you really think about it, but it's being worked on. It's a huge gap. And part of that comes down to physicians and everybody as well. It's the way that we code some of these things, right? You know, somebody might code spinal cord injury, somebody might code transverse myelitis, somebody might code paraplegia, and it doesn't, you know, there can be 100 different ways of coding something. So it's definitely a big gap, but it is being worked on.
And we actually did a research project related to that in Colorado. But in terms of the workaround that I did while I was at Craig Hospital, was I instructed all of my patients to always request courtesy copies of lab works or consults or any professional that they saw, ask for a courtesy copy to be sent to their primary care provider. 99% of the time it ended up being me, but if they had a family medicine person or an internal medicine person, there was an opportunity for that professional courtesy copy that is free because it's part of continuity of care. There's one place, there's one office that has all of your records. And so that's one workaround that you
That's a good recommendation.
Yeah, for 30 years, you know, I've always said that. have pick one place and always have courtesy copies sent there, rather than asking for them yourself because they're going to ask you to pay, you know, $1 a page or something like that.
Mhm.
For another professional, they're obligated to send the records to optimize continuity of care.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I know on the East Coast, we might be getting into some people's dinner time, so I don't want to keep you guys too much longer. We really appreciate all three speakers coming and talking with us today, and we look forward to getting into more depth and sharing the primary care resources out throughout our community.
Hey, Kim, Bill, a question about archiving. I see we're recording. I know you mentioned it early on. Will it be on the NASDAQ site or sent out to these folks, or?
Yes, it will be all the above.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Really appreciated all the breadth of experienced speakers. Very helpful. Thank you.
And explore the website. You're going to love it. There's so much actionable stuff in there, Bill.
All right. I think we will go ahead and conclude here. And I look forward to sharing more information with people in the future.